Welcome to the Boston City Council's Ionella Chamber for a hearing in the City Council's Committee on Planning, Development, and Transportation on docket number 1327, order for a hearing regarding Boston speed limits and pedestrian safety. My name is Michelle Wu, and I'm chair of this committee. I'm joined by my colleagues and the sponsors of this hearing order, District Councillor Ed Flynn and District Councillor Frank Baker. I want to remind everyone that this public hearing is being recorded and broadcast live on channels Comcast 8, RCN 82, and Verizon 1964, as well as streaming on the City of Boston website. Please silence your cell phones and other devices. And if you wish to testify, please check the box on the sign-in sheets, check the appropriate sheet on the sheets by the door, and we will then take public testimony. Okay, so again, I want to thank our sponsors for continuing to follow this issue. Thanks in particular to Councillor Baker's leadership over the last term. Boston now has a lower default speed limit, and we have much more work to do, but he's just been a committed advocate on this issue and so many of the issues that are related to neighborhood safety and street safety. So I want to give each of the sponsors a chance to say a few words, and then we'll turn it over to the administration at that point. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Councillor Wu, for your leadership on this issue. And I also want to say thank you to Councillor Baker for working closely with the Walsh administration to help reduce the speed limit, but more importantly, to help reduce injuries, fatalities that we have in our city. It's because of your leadership that we're making great progress. I believe pedestrian safety is the top issue in my district and one of the most important in our city. Safety for all on our roads, for pedestrians, motorists, cyclists. Vision zero, no fatal or serious crashes in Boston. Again, I'd also like to highlight the work of Mayor Walsh, his leadership in moving our city forward through various traffic calming measures, one of which was lowering the speed limit to 25 miles per hour last January. Despite this significant progress, hardly a day goes by when my friends, neighbors, constituents, even my elderly parents, often walking my special needs nephew, that they don't tell me about speeding vehicles and close calls in a crosswalk. We have more vehicles, more commuters, and more ride sharers vehicles cutting through our neighborhoods. Unfortunately, we still experience these and worse, tragic crashes in the city. Most recently in July, a beautiful young boy was tragically taken from us following a crash in South Boston. His sister was also injured. The entire community continues to pray for their family. Our community has also become mobilized around this critical issue, including many South Boston mothers. Folks like Katie Donovan, who was struck on Farragut Road in the spring. She's become a champion for pedestrian safety in our neighborhood. Katie and the people of South Boston have strongly advocated for changes that our city and state transportation agencies are currently enacting, such as a road diet being constructed on Day Boulevard for one lane of traffic to help encourage lower speed and deter cut-through traffic. The city continues to make progress on this issue, but in my position, it is still too fast. I offered a 12-point plan recently for safer streets in South Boston this summer, including traffic calming measures like speed humps, raised crosswalks, road diets, speed boards, curb extensions, and greater enforcement. I was pleased the Department of Transportation announced at a community meeting that they would include many of these, as well as the 20 miles per hour zones as part of the South Boston Action Plan. Councillor Baker and I are calling on for this hearing as we would like to start a dialogue around the merits of a 20 mile per hour speed limit in Boston, unless otherwise posted. If not 20 miles per hour throughout the city, I would like to see 20 miles per hour speed zones at relevant locations that make sense and that work for the city. We recently had Commissioner Morales from BCYF write to Mass DOT asking for 20 miles per hour in front of the L Street Bathhouse and Curley Recreation Center due to the speeding, which has caused tragedies there in the past. 20 miles per hour zones have worked well for school zones as drivers slow for our children. I think it has merit to apply this to areas like L Street, where it is so narrow and tough to react for drivers and pedestrians alike. The same goes for recreation areas like Farragut Road near the street hockey court or Evans baseball field, to name a few. Data from the city's website and AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety indicates that at 30 miles per hour, the likelihood of a fatality or serious injury was 50%, while if a car was traveling 20 miles per hour, that number drops significantly to 18%. I think this conversation will have merit as we all try to do our part to realize Vision Zero. I want to thank you for being here, for joining us, and we are lucky to have you working for the city. You're doing an excellent job, and we understand it's a difficult job, but we want to say thank you for being with us and for working closely with the City Council.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councillor Flynn, for filing this and asking me to join on. Like Councillor Flynn had already stated, we were able to take the speed limit from 30 to 25, which I think was a good step. I always thought it should have been 20. But furthermore, I believe this discussion here today is as much about the speed limit and as it is about what we're doing for redesign, safe streets, those sorts of things. I got to be honest, I'm a little taken back that Chief Osgood well, thank you for coming first, Vanette, but Chief Osgood isn't here and Gina isn't here. I'm more than taken back because for me this is Vision Zero. This is talking about how we make people slow down on our side streets. I mean, we came out with, I think, 12 pilots, 9 of which went to one district. I don't think that that's fair. I was the one who spearheaded this legislation, and I'm just looking at you, Vanette. It's not you, but I spearheaded the legislation, and I didn't get a single pilot district in District 3, and I have some pretty traveled roads. But I'm glad you're here, Vanette. Hopefully we can sure talk about those sorts of things, and maybe the message will be clear. There's people that want street calming measures. We want raised crosswalks. We want speed bumps, and I don't know why we're sitting here still talking about this, and then we sprinkle them around this. Well, we don't sprinkle them around the city. We kind of put them all mostly in one area. So when are we just going to be able to expand on that, and we can stop? We can at least give some people, some streets, some relief. The start with the heaviest traveled streets, and I don't know. Thank you, Vanette. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. I also want to welcome Councillor OMalley to this hearing and offer him a chance to say a few words.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to come by and first off thank the lead sponsors on this initiative, Councillors Ed Flynn and Councillor Frank Baker, for their great work, as well as yours, Madam Chair. This is something you've been working on for quite some time. Probably 5 or 6 years ago, I convened a hearing on traffic calming measures, and it was looking at sort of new technology and new ways that we could provide safer experiences for our pedestrians, for our cyclists, for our runners, and I think it's important to continue that conversation. I will say we've seen a lot more public awareness and understanding that we need to be doing more to encourage multimodal transportation. We need to be doing more to severely limit the number of car crashes that we see, sadly, still in this city, and a number of tools are at our disposal, and this is certainly one of them as well. Again, lowering the speed limit, but also looking forward to having the opportunity to continue the great work that you all have done, and so many advocates who are here and those that may be watching have done to really make the streets as safe as humanly possible, specifically for pedestrians, for cyclists, for others. It seems every week we hear about a tragic death caused by a car crash, and as the municipality, we have an opportunity and obligation to do more to make sure that our streets are safe. So looking forward to continuing the work and the good effort. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor OMalley. I want to note also that Councillor Zakim, District 8 Councillor, submitted a letter. Dear Councillor Wu, thank you for holding this hearing and leading this discussion on this vital issue. Unfortunately, I am unable to attend the hearing today, but I look forward to reviewing the tape. Sincerely, Josh Zakim. All I will add is that, I would just want to underscore Councillor Baker's frustration and urgency, and in general, we'll get into more of these questions with Vineet, but the whole approach that the region has right now about street safety is very reactive in a way that we are reminded every day of the seriousness and the consequences of delay. We know that an application system that rations out safety neighborhood by neighborhood, sort of month by month by month, means that we will see more crashes and we will see more fatalities and serious injuries. Just 3 in the last week in Boston, or 1 technically over the border in Cambridge, but a pedestrian killed in West Roxbury, another seriously injured in Roxbury, cyclist by the Museum of Science. And we know that these are all preventable with the right street design decisions. So anyway, I had been reminded that my own policy in conducting hearing was to make sure that we incorporate public testimony throughout. So I want to start with the first 4 people who had signed up. I'm going to read off these names, and if you could make your way down to one of these 2 public testimony podiums, feel free to line up on either one of them, and we'll just alternate. So the folks who will testify now before the administration presentation are Steve Jonas, Nancy Morrisroe, Tony Lechuga, and Adi Nochur. Steve?
Good morning. Thank you very much for holding this hearing. This is an incredibly important topic, and I feel it's a life safety topic, so thank you for drawing attention to it. I'm a resident of downtown area. I live near the public garden, and I walk through the city every day. I don't walk through all of the city, but I walk through that area in the city. And the increased rate of red light running and speeding is astonishing. Crossing intersections has become a life-risking activity. And I know that speed limits are an important component here, but I feel really strongly that automated enforcement is really a crucial element in looking at this. In the area that I walk around, there is no enforcement. There's no sign of police, there's no ticketing. The rate of citations, I understand, is way down in the city for any moving violations. And increasingly, municipalities across the country and in other countries are going to automated enforcement systems with red light cameras and speeding cameras with appropriate buffers and addressing the civil liberty issues that are attached to any of these sorts of things. Down the road, Providence put this in earlier this year and are still using this and learning from it. I understand in the first week they had 11,000 citations for red light running in Providence. It's becoming rampant in the city, and without any enforcement whatsoever, it's just going to keep increasing, and the danger is going to go up exponentially. So I would encourage us to look at camera systems. I understand that the state law currently prohibits that, but the irony, of course, is that our lower speed limit is as a result of a home rule petition, and I would think that the city council might give some attention to either working with the state legislature for changing the state regulations or for looking at home rule petitions, at least for a pilot experiment. In the area around the public garden, which is surrounded by 4 four-lane street segments, motorists view this as a highway. And the difference between 25 miles an hour and 20 miles an hour is insignificant. People driving 50 miles an hour and going through the red lights because they're all 4-lane roads there. So I know there are a lot of narrow roads and 1-lane roads and 2-lane roads where there's an issue, but we have 4 four-lane segments that surround the garden, and it is the Wild West these days. So I would really encourage the council to look at automated enforcement, at least red light cameras, possibly speeding cameras, and learning from other municipalities that are well ahead of us in putting these in place. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nancy?
Holding this hearing, and I just want to echo these thoughts because I've been working with Councillor Flynn in the city and trying to deal with Arlington Street, which has become a super highway, trying to get some calming measures. I've been promised in the spring we're going to get a pedestrian flashing signal there, but it is a super highway, and there is going to be another death like there was in South Boston and the South End. But I also want to talk about, I think reducing the speed limit as part of Vision Zero is really critical, but I also want to know how we're going to respond to the growth of the ride services, Uber and Lyft, that are really contributing to congestion with drivers not knowing the streets, using neighborhoods as cut-throughs. That's also an accident waiting to happen. According to a recent report that was put out this summer, between 2012 and 2016, Boston added more than 34,000 vehicles to our city streets. 60% of people use ride-hailing services. That's an incredible number. It's only going to continue to grow. So our streets are beyond congested. Policymakers need to start looking at measures to deal with this, such as putting some types of limits on the number of Lyft and Uber cars that are out on the streets today. So I'm a resident of Bay Village, but I'm also a member of ADCA, Alliance of Downtown Civic Organizations. We have this transportation on our agenda for tomorrow night's meeting, and we hope to work with the City Council as our next issue in tackling this. So thank you again for holding this. This is a really important. And Vineet, you know Arlington Street as a Bay Village resident. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Tony?
Yeah, thank you. I want to echo a lot of things that the councilors said and that you said as well, that we need more than just signs. We need known measures that include design to make our streets safer. Putting up new street signs that are a speed limit of 20 miles per hour are, in essence, a measure of hope. You hope that people follow them. We can hope that there is possible enforcement of those, but ultimately we're merely hoping that people follow the rules. Putting people's lives in the presence of hope is probably not a good idea when we know that we could be implementing design that is better, that actually prevents these types of things. I think it's extremely telling that since Vision Zero has been implemented in the city of Boston, we've had multiple roads. Councillor Flynn, in your own district, Preble Street, Farragut Road, are both streets that have been repaved since that time without these sort of design measures. And we've seen multiple accidents in the past year on both of those roads where pedestrians have been hit by cars. Why we're being reactive is inexcusable. These should be a part of every street design process moving forward, not just our slow streets, but every street that we're repaving should be following this sort of model. I also think it's really telling that there isn't a representative from MassDOT or the DCR here today. That's hugely problematic when we consider how often our roads change ownership within the city of Boston. The same design standards that we're implementing in Boston should be implemented on roads that are not owned by the city of Boston. Why those two agencies don't have a representative here is beyond me. I think it speaks volumes about the level of prioritization that this is put on. Ultimately, we would support lowering a speed limit to 20 miles per hour if it were in conjunction with something like better street design and ubiquitous better street design, not just reactive, not just by application, but across the city. And I think all of you know that. I think the citizens of Boston know that. I think it's just time to actually take those bold steps towards making our roads the way they should be. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Adi?
Good morning. My name is Adi Nochur. I'm with Walk Boston, and I want to thank the council for convening this critical hearing to talk about speed limits and pedestrian safety and traffic calming. And I'll start, I just want to quote from our executive director, Wendy Landman, in the Boston Globe on August 28th, when this hearing was first called for. Quote, simply changing the speed limit without doing anything about the built environment does a little, but not nearly enough. And I think that's a message all of us are taking to heart here. I do want to echo what the folks before me said about automated enforcement. That's a push we support and know it needs enabling legislation at the state level. Very important to think about how that's rolled out in an equitable way, but that's something that I would encourage the council to take up. But I think fundamentally this is about street design and it is about traffic calming. And it's a fundamental matter of equity as well. How do we make sure that all neighborhoods get traffic calming, and how are we prioritizing areas that have historically been underinvested? But also, how do we think about the pace of rollout and implementation? And I understand, Councillor Flynn, that a number of improvements have been put in place in your district in response to the crash that happened several months ago, an absolute horrific tragedy. And it's great that we have improvements have been rolled out quickly, but the fact does remain that there are a number of the pilot safety zones that are still waiting for improvements. So how are we making sure that this is rolled out at a fast pace across the city? So that's something I would encourage all of us to think about. Another piece that ties back to this question about design and speed limits that also encouraged the council to take up with MassDOT is how this posted speed limits are often set based upon the 85th percentile at how fast traffic is moving. And it creates this circular loop where we're unable to design for the speeds that we want. And as a result, we have city streets where, even though the citywide default has been reduced to 25 miles per hour, posted speed limits can still be higher than that because they're set at this regulatory level. So how do we undo that, not at a state level, to bring the posted speed limit in line with what we want, but fundamentally, how do we also redesign our streets to enable those speed limits? So again, thank you for taking up this critical issue, and I'll look forward to our continued partnership to address it.
Thank you, Adi. I want to recognize that Councillor Janie is here as well. Councillor Janie, would you like to offer any words?
I'm here to listen. Thank you.
Thank you. So at this point, again, please continue to check the box if you'd like to testify. We'll return to public testimony after this next segment with the administration's presentation. So I'll turn it over to Vineet.
Thank you, Councillor. Again, I'm Vineet Gupta. I'm the Director of Planning at the Boston Transportation Department. And first, on behalf of the department, I'd like to thank the city councilors for your leadership on this very important issue. I think it's with your work that the city has focused more and more on safety on our streets. Safety on our streets continues to be our #1 priority as a department and as a city. And we have several programs underway that I'll talk about in a little bit. But rest be assured, this is something that we are taking with utmost seriousness and are allocating resources within the department to address this issue. This is really the first step in the process of looking at 20 miles per hour speed limit as a default speed limit. We will continue to meet with the city council and with our community with additional representatives from our department to make sure that this issue is addressed thoroughly. I'm here as much to listen and learn as everybody else is, but I would like to make a couple of statements. As has been mentioned, safety on our streets is really a combination of speed limit regulations plus making changes, physical changes on our streets that are design-based, plus improving enforcement. And all these things work in combination and will have the best effect if that's the way we proceed. We do have a number of ongoing programs, and as has been mentioned, this is something that improving speed safety through street design is something that we consider with every project that we embrace, that we implement. There are priority corridors that we've implemented recently, including many in South Boston, including L Street, Neelan Street in Chinatown, Mattapan Square in Dorchester, Tremont Street in the South End and Lower Roxbury, Beacon Street. We will continue to identify priority corridors in neighborhoods that haven't been addressed yet, and we'll continue to expand our efforts in those neighborhoods. We also have a slow streets program. Selection of those neighborhood slow street zones is based on criteria that we've established that has been on our website from the very beginning of the program. It looks at percentages of vulnerable residents in the area, the elderly, children. It looks at historic crash data in the neighborhood. It looks at the location of community facilities like parks and elderly homes and community centers. We are extremely busy working on the zones that we've identified, but we continue to identify new ones and expand the program citywide. As you know, we reduced speed limit to 25 miles an hour, and thank you for your leadership on making that happen. Your work, your advocacy with the state legislature to help us make that happen was critical. We did a huge multilingual outreach campaign when we reduced our speed limit, our default speed limit, to 25 miles an hour, which we hope had good outreach. Since that speed limit was instituted, we've been collecting data. We have over 60 speed feedback signs, these throughout the city, in every neighborhood in the city. These tell a motorist what speed they're driving at and will flash if you're driving over the posted speed limit. Many communities have asked us for those, and we are installing them as quickly as we can. We know that they have been effective. As we continue to work with you to examine the 20 miles per hour speed limit proposal, it's something that we would, again, need to work with the state legislature. We would have to look at changing all our signs to 20 miles an hour. But at the very outset, there are absolutely areas in the city, whether they're school zones or neighborhood slow street zones, that we can mark as 20 miles an hour. There are streets that we can identify working with the community and with the city council that we can mark at 20 miles an hour, but it has to be done hand in hand with the community. Enforcement is a critical piece of this, and we are working with the police department to improve that. Of course, as has been mentioned, it has to be thoughtful. There are several rights issues that we have to be cognizant of, particularly past behaviors or past policing that we've seen, and this is true for any city in the country. But it's a partnership with the police department that we'll continue to focus on. That was kind of a brief overview of some of the programs that we're doing, our commitment to work with the City Council on looking at the 20 miles an hour regulation, and our efforts to expand our neighborhood safety program throughout the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vineet. So we'll go to questions from councilors now, starting with Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Councillor Wu, and again, thank you to Vineet for your strong leadership on this issue for many years. We appreciate your great work.
Thank you.
One aspect I'd like to focus on, I did have several conversations with Commissioner Fiandaca in the past. We have distracted drivers, we have distracted pedestrians as well. What can we do to have a better PSA program informing residents, informing neighbors, drivers that may live in Boston or live outside of Boston? What type of PSA program could we have to let people know the rules of the road, how they can be safer, and could you work on that type of program? I think it would be helpful to almost every neighborhood in Boston to have a PSA informing people exactly what a blinking red light means, what a blinking yellow light means, how to walk across the street. We do see a lot of jaywalking as well. But just could you give us a little background on that?
Absolutely, and I had education in my notes, and I just kind of skipped over it, unfortunately. But absolutely, having a PSA program, particularly focused on distracted driving, is a key component of this initiative. We don't want, people should be looking at their speedometers and not at their phones. And there are several ways to kind of launch a campaign. Other cities have tried to do this. It can start at the fundamental level, working with the RMV, so that people who are getting licenses can be given some training on this issue, or we can do some outreach through the RMV to get to all people who have licenses. It also means creating educational materials for our neighborhood residents. And, you know, when we did the 25 miles an hour speed limit change, we mounted a good campaign that we can use as an example to decrease distracted driving. So, and you know, we're happy to work with the City Council in finding programs where we can really get deep into the neighborhoods to educate our residents about this critical issue. Plus, we have to work with Mass DOT. There are many drivers who, every day, particularly on weekdays, that are coming from outside of Boston to come to our great city. And we need this campaign to get to everybody who is driving.
Thank you. As it relates to reducing the speed limit to 20 miles per hour, can we do it automatically in places where we have a high concentration of elderly, or at a school, or at a daycare center? How can we work without going to the State House to make that type of law enacted?
Yeah, we can do that in specific areas. As you know, we already have 20 miles an hour at school zones, so which is implemented through the commissioner's orders. We can continue to do that at other locations as well, based on need and based on our analysis of those areas. Absolutely.
I have a lot of elderly developments in my district. I have a lot of daycare centers as well. What would the process be for us to enact that?
I think we can do that by working closely with you. It's a matter of going to the sites and investigating, analyzing, seeing what's appropriate. Have our planners and engineers go with you to do a thorough analysis.
Thank you. That'd be huge if we were able to accomplish something like that. What's the decision-making process for the Department of Transportation if you're going to add a stop sign at a location or not, or you're going to add a light at a location or not? What type of input do you gather? What type of neighborhood process is there? And for example, on L Street, which is a critical street in South Boston, would it benefit to have more stop signs on that street? You know, I see a lot of traffic coming from the South Shore going up L Street to Summer Street, but, you know, how can we stop, or slow down, rather, that traffic? What's the decision-making process for you?
So there are two parts to the decision-making process. One is a technical analysis that we are required to do and follow state and federal guidelines. And our engineers, once we have a request for a stop sign, our engineers will do the requisite analysis to see whether it qualifies for whether a stop sign can be located. That's one part. The other part has to do with community input, and where people who live in the area, who know the street better than anybody else will, what their perception is, what their daily experience is relative to what they see on the street. And so we try to combine both those dimensions when we take a decision, whether it's a stop sign, whether it's a new traffic light, whether it's a changing of the timing of an existing traffic light, whether it's putting a speed hump, and other kind of measures to slow traffic down. But it's something that we are, as a practical matter, doing every day in some neighborhood or the other throughout the city.
Thank you. I think it would be very helpful to my neighborhood to have, especially on L Street, to have more stop signs. I know you mentioned state and federal guidelines or recommendations that are also part of the decision-making process. what are some of those state and federal guidelines that would prohibit a stop sign on a major street such as L Street?
Yeah, I don't have the exact technicalities on the top of my head, but in general, the goal is to see how effective they're going to be. And if on a major street you have stop signs at every intersection, sometimes the expected effect of that is not as anticipated. But it's something that we, like I said, if it's coming from the community, we obviously look at it seriously. It's after some time, it's diminishing returns come in, because if every intersection has a stop sign, people will start ignoring them. And so we want to make sure that they're effective.
I notice if you're traveling on certain streets and you're going 25 miles an hour, it's almost impossible to stop at a crosswalk with someone crossing. Your brakes just won't allow it, depending on how close you are to the crosswalk. But I also know that if you are going 20 miles an hour in that same situation, you have obviously a better chance of stopping. That's where I'm coming from, is I see so many elderly people in crosswalks. I see children going to school in crosswalks. My own parents, who are elderly with a disabled grandson, are in crosswalks, and I see so many times that drivers will just drive right by you when you're in the crosswalk. That's my main concern. It's a public safety issue for me. And that's why I really want to see us do a reduction of the speed limit. Again, I want to say thank you for being here. I know you are working hard on this issue, and thanks for giving us the opportunity to talk with you. And I do envision, as you mentioned in your opening comments, that this is maybe just a first step. It's an ongoing dialogue. We're not, there's more we have to do, more discussions we have to have, more data we have to look at, more input from the community. But again, it's a first step, and hopefully soon, or maybe down the road, we can get to that place where we do reduce the speed limit from 25 to 20. But again, I want to say thank you for being here and for your leadership on this issue.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Baker.
Hi, Vanette. About how much are we spending on average on the safe streets? So if there's 12 different ones, what was the average cost of them?
Because each district is very different, it's difficult to kind of put a ballpark number on each of them. But I can tell you overall, we have in the city's budget, we have $3.1 million. That
3.1?
Yes.
Is what you spent or we have now?
What we're spending to do these neighborhood slow street zones and the priority corridors, such as L Street and Neelan Street.
Didn't hear anything in District 3.
As I said, Councillor, we're happy to sit down with you.
Please talk to me.
Identify the areas that your community thinks are critical.
And does Public Works do the installation on this, or is this all contracted out?
It's contracted out, but Public Works manages all construction. We do bi-weekly meetings as two departments to go through.
Is there anything that Public Works can be doing that we can keep in-house? Like, for instance, let's talk about the rubber strips that are on L Street. How much do those cost? How hard would it be to send a crew out, Train Street, Dot Ave, Bowden Street, Dudley Street, Monadnock Street, Virginia Street? I mean, how can we get Public Works to do that?
Absolutely. There are some locations where our Public Works crew can, through their own resources and their own capacities, make some kind of more easy-to-do implementation that don't require...
And are those rubber strips, are we going to take those up in the wintertime, or do they just stay down?
The rubber strips, are you talking about the flex posts?
No. There's speed bumps. It's like a rubber strip. They're on L Street. They're on Day Boulevard. I've seen them around a little bit.
I don't have a specific answer to that. I can find out for you and get back to you on that, Councillor.
So, I mean, something as simple as that would help.
Exactly.
Would help on a lot of streets, and I don't think we need to, have $1 million budget for that. And if I'm pointing at that chair, I see Chris Osgood there, I see Gina there, or whoever else is gonna say, yeah, that sounds like a good idea, and, you know, can we do that? Can you bring that message back?
Sure,
The
absolutely.
rubber strips that are on L Street, they can't be, I mean, you could fill up a pickup truck and do, in a weekend, you could make a lot of neighborhoods happy, you know, by doing a simple measure like that. And then we can start talking about bringing the speed limit down and bumping sidewalks out and speed bumps. But there should be something happening now. This is a long, long conversation going on here. So we talk a little bit about the video enforcement. So like that sort of thing, and I know we need state approval, that would happen just at red lights or not more cameras all over the place? What are we talking about there? What does that look like?
First, on your issue of let's get some easy-to-do things right off the bat.
Yeah.
Absolutely, we 100% agree, and I'll make sure that we follow up on that.
And I know you agree, and I've been told that everybody agrees, but I still don't see anything, and I'm, you know, people are asking for it. They see things happening around, and, you know, whether it's a priority corridor or whether it fit into that data set that you guys came up with, people that live there know what needs to happen on their streets, and they're looking for relief. You know, it shouldn't be, okay, a 3-year-old got killed in Southie. Now let's go flood that whole area. You see what I'm saying? Like, and again, this conversation should probably be happening in private, but that seat's empty, that seat's empty, that seat's empty. So video, can you talk about, before video enforcement, let's talk about, Nancy brought up Uber and Lyft and all those. Do we have any intention as a city to try and get a handle on that? Is there any, do you have any ideas? I know it's not about 20 miles an hour, and I know it's not about speed bumps or anything, but it's certainly adding to the chaos that's in our neighborhoods.
It absolutely is, and it's something that we are very aware of. We are having direct conversations with, for example, Lyft and Uber to see what we can do. So there are two issues. One is congestion, and congestion is created on the one hand by a larger number of vehicles on our streets, and on the other hand by Uber and Lyft just double parking to pick up passengers, and that backs up our streets. And so there's some conversations about setting aside curbside space so that they can actually pull into the curb.
Yeah,
So that they
a lot of the new developments are doing that, but that's also, that also may increase capacity.
Right. The other piece.
And I think about it a lot. How would we realistically, you know, limit that? I'm not necessarily opposed to Uber or Lyft, but the amount of vehicles that are on our street, and every one of them has an Uber sign in it. I mean, we
don't control Ubers and Lyfts directly. It's through state legislation, so we don't have any direct enforcement or oversight on Lyft and Uber. But we are trying to, so in addition to getting them on the curb so that they're not double parking and blocking traffic, the other piece is to incentivize people sharing these vehicles. So there are fewer cars, if, you know, as opposed to picking up one passenger, if they can pick up two.
That's good in theory, but people aren't
You know,
doing it.
it's, I think that it's almost a third of all Uber rides, and I can't, don't quote me on this statistic, but it's, are actually shared. So if you're at Logan Airport, for example, and you want to go to Newton, you can actually share a ride with another passenger, so you save money and it's one less car on our streets. But that's one, you know, ride sharing will only work if it's shared. Otherwise, we're going to see increased congestion on our streets. Ride sharing will only work if it complements our public transportation system in a way that there's incentive to take the T if you can, rather than get into a car.
And let's skip the video enforcement. Let's get on to priority corridors. So something's deemed a priority corridor, Nealon Street. What does that mean? Especially if Nealon Street's already been paved or whatever. Does that mean we're going back into it? We're gonna?
No, we finished Nealon Street.
Yeah, right. Oh, so it's been designed as a priority corridor?
And implemented.
Okay.
Yeah. So we are currently in the
And what
process.
falls in it, like, so priority corridor, what does that mean? What did that mean for Nealon Street?
Yeah. So what we're doing currently is we are, and we're following the example of all major cities in the country. We are identifying what we call high crash corridors. So there is good data now, as you can see on our website, and we can easily identify our major roadways that have a high rate of crashes on them. And so once we have this high crash network, we're calling it, we'll have all the streets in the city that we believe should get immediate attention. And that's one piece. The other piece is that we want to make sure that
What is the attention that the city gets? Is it raised crosswalks? Is it larger?
It's again, it's a combination of measures. It might be some road diet so that, you know, if it's as somebody mentioned, if it's 4 lanes of traffic, everybody's speeding, so
Right.
a road diet will decrease the number of lanes. It's providing, where it's appropriate, raised intersections where cars have to slow down when they come to the intersection. It's providing speed humps where it's appropriate to slow cars down. It's improving signage. It's regulating our traffic lights to prioritize pedestrians when they're crossing the street so they have enough time and enough warning in the signal phase.
Yeah.
There are a number of measures we can do. One very effective measure we've seen is what we call daylighting, which is when you're trying to cross the street and if there's a car parked right next to the crosswalk, you can't see a car that's in the travel lane.
Yeah.
So we block out the space where the parked car is so a pedestrian can kind of have better sight line on approaching vehicles. We've done that in Rochester, in other parts of the city, in South
Yep.
Boston.
Yep.
So there are several measures that we pursue. We have a good team of engineers and planners who have learned how these things can be done effectively and quickly. So that's our approach.
Well, Vinette, thank you for coming today.
It's my pleasure, and we'll make sure to follow up with you.
An answer on the rubber strips,
Yeah.
please. Thank you.
But just to let you know, those are actually on Day Boulevard, the rubber strips, so they're on a state road, but I'll follow up.
Yeah, but are they on L Street too, Eddie?
Not on L Street, Day Boulevard.
They're just on Day
Yeah,
Boulevard, so.
so I'm happy to talk with DCR and follow up on that.
I'm sure somebody here has seen them, knows about, I mean,
Yeah.
I think based on what we do with them, do we have to go out and take them out in the wintertime for the plows? But even if that's just two fasteners that are in the ground, it seems like better than what we're doing now.
Okay. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your leadership.
And again,
on this.
thank you for showing up today.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. Councillor Janie.
Certainly, my appreciation to the makers of this important hearing order. So one problem is that we just have a lot of cars on the road. We have a lot of people using our roads who are distracted, whether through telephones or other things that people are doing. And the more cars that we have and the more congestion we have and the more traffic, the angrier people seem to be with each other, unfortunately. And unfortunately, you know, rather than really trying to abide by the rules of the road, you have people who are trying to outsmart each other and can obviously cause crashes. So I certainly appreciate the work that you're doing to try to stop that. I want to come back to the slow streets. You mentioned earlier that $3.1 million is in the budget for slow streets.
It's $3.1 million for designing and implementing our neighborhood slow streets as well as our priority corridor projects. Just to kind of make one point on that, any new street design we do, which doesn't have to be part of the 3.1, any new street design, any resurfacing project that we do always considers safety measures as we would do with that 3.1 million. So it's just not that 3.1 million, it's practically every project that we do.
No, I hear that. So what you're saying is it's not just slow streets, there are other projects beyond that. But with slow streets,
Sure.
which is neighbors come together, they submit a proposal saying that this is what they'd like to see in their neighborhood, and they get chosen. So how much money would you need to meet the demand? Like, what was the demand for slow streets, and how much money would you need to meet the demand?
It's difficult to put a dollar value on that. It's a combination of having it in our budget, which we do, having resources in terms of personnel to do the design work, do the community meetings.
Well, let's think about it this way. So the 3.1 million got us how many slow streets implemented in the city?
We are in the process of implementing 5. So our goal is to do 5 a year.
And 3 million will get us 5 a year?
Again, it's not...
Roughly?
Yeah.
How many applications did we get?
So originally, we got, and I might be off a little bit here, but over 50. I think it was 57.
Over 50. So if you just did the math there...
Absolutely, yeah.
We need a lot more money in the budget. Tell me how do you then, so how do we get away from the squeaky wheel gets the oil? How do we get away from the neighbors who just know how to organize themselves and put forth a great proposal, gets their application request met, and the neighbors who maybe have a more dangerous, let's say, intersection, or there's a park or school or whatever the issue is, how do you account for equity in making this decision?
Thank you. And we can do that through analyzing data about where the crashes have been, which neighborhoods have been historically underserved, which neighborhoods have the most number of young people or the most number of older people, which are the most vulnerable populations. We have all that data. We have very good crash data now, so we can identify patterns in different parts of the city. And as I mentioned earlier, we are identifying what we're calling our crash network of corridors, which kind of a high crash corridors. So we'll know based on data which areas are the most vulnerable. A lot of data on how communities have expressed their concerns is available also on our website. We have a community concerns map where people can just very quickly drop in a pin that says they noticed an issue in that particular intersection or on the street. We're also going out to neighborhoods proactively in every neighborhood in the city to kind of talk about what the issues are, to increase awareness that we can try and help from City Hall if they feel that there are issues about not being able to cross the street. We are working with our various departments, whether it's the Elderly Commission, whether it's the school department, with police and EMS, through the mayor's Vision Zero task force, to proactively find areas that need our attention.
And I think that's great. I think you definitely have to be proactive and intentional. I worry about, in some neighborhoods, an underreporting. So sometimes a car could be hit, a parked car could be hit. Someone never reports it because they know nothing's going to happen and they just try to deal with it through their insurance. Or if it's a minor fender bender, they don't call the police and report it because they know nothing's going to happen, and so they just exchange information. And so as you rely on data, I think it's also important to acknowledge and recognize that there is underreporting that happens, and oftentimes in certain neighborhoods, people kind of just try to handle things themselves because they don't trust that something will happen by reporting it. Let's come back to, I noticed on Albany, there is, and I'm not sure what you guys call it, there's this crosswalk that has these poles and the lights that flash, and it really helps pedestrians get across the street. How do we get more of those on major, streets that could really use them?
Yeah, we call those flashing beacons, and we are, as a matter of fact, in the process of stocking up with more of those so that they can be located at major corridors where we've heard from the community, where we have data that there is excessive speeding. So that's something that we will continue to do, to install in new locations throughout the city.
And what about changes to our traffic lights? You get the walk sign that's white with an image of a person, and then it starts to blink, like sometimes you get the hand, but you don't necessarily get a true understanding of how many seconds you have left to cross. Sometimes you'll get a countdown of seconds, and then before it ends, you'll get the hand. So you don't necessarily know. And what I find is that people, when they see the hand, rather than stop, it's like the yellow light, rather than stop, you speed up so you can kind of go through. And I worry that it creates the wrong kind of incentive and that people are less safe without knowing the actual amount of time that they have to cross the street, rather than, so putting the actual time out there, I think, is a better way, a safer way of communicating with pedestrians around how much time they have to cross the street, rather than that blinking hand.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are installing more and more of what we call our pedestrian countdown signal, so that actually tells you the number of seconds left to cross the street. And you'll probably see these and throughout the city. We'll continue to retrofit all our traffic signals so pedestrians know how many seconds they have to cross the street. It's, as you point out, it's a very effective way of making our streets safer to cross, giving confidence to pedestrians relative to when they should leave the curb and get into the street.
Right, no. And so, I noticed when you travel to other cities, they have a more accurate description in their traffic lights. I also noticed on my trip to Seattle around the art learning journey that they had traffic signals for cyclists.
Yeah.
Are we moving more in that direction as well?
Yes, we have several locations already throughout the city where we have installed new bike facilities with traffic signals just for bikes. So whether it's Commercial Street in the North End, whether it's out near Forest Hills, near the KC Arborway, where some new bike facilities have been provided, you'll see actually bike signs. On Commonwealth Avenue, we're putting some. Wherever on Melnia Cass, you'll get some when it's finished. Dudley Street will have some. So it's something that we're doing as a matter of course.
No, I think that's great. And I mean, I think as Councillor Flynn has already said, that this is, a huge public safety issue, particularly concerned about our seniors, our children, those who are disabled, and how they really navigate our city. And so I certainly appreciate the work that you do and understand that we have a long way to go and making sure that everyone can use our streets safely. But I certainly appreciate
Thank you,
what's
Councillor.
happening thus far. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Janie. Councillor OMalley still not back. Councillor McCarthy is here instead. Welcome, Councillor McCarthy. Any questions for Vineet?
I don't want to repeat everything. I really only have, hi Vineet, how are you?
How are you doing,
I really only had one question regarding Waze and Garmin and wayfaring devices. There are other towns who've, they've worked with those companies to not allow them on certain streets at certain times. Have we started to talk about that?
We're absolutely talking about that. I can give you an update. I'll have to check back on what the state of the conversation is, but absolutely no one should be cutting through our residential streets. But they should remain on major arterials. So we want to put a stop to that.
Okay. Yeah, because there was a, yesterday in the news I was watching on Black Friday, Rentham is blocking out Waze and Garmin, and actually they're putting police officers on side streets to make sure that everybody doesn't cut through to go shopping at the Rentham outlets. And the neighbors were saying how grateful they were, because generally on the side streets there were 30, 40, 50 cars packed. They couldn't even get out of their own driveways during Black Friday. So dodge the Rentham outlets if you plan on going shopping. So, but thanks, Vineet. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. I know Councillor OMalley is still intending to come back and ask his question, so I'll ask some of mine in the meantime. I guess I want to focus on the Neighborhood Slow Streets program. Vineet, is the intention to keep it as is moving forward as well?
Right now, that's in terms of the formal slow
The
streets.
process, yeah.
Yes, but we're also, you don't have to go through the slow streets application process. We are trying to make changes simultaneously as part of a broader effort. And like I said, any street reconstruction project, any roadway surfacing project, we also go to specific intersections rather than have to do a whole process for a zone, where we can make a intervention just specific to that particular location, whether it's a crosswalk or a full intersection. So there are simultaneous programs that are going on that complement the Slow Streets program.
I mean, I guess I want to reiterate here publicly, I think what I've conveyed through letters and other materials to the department, that I disagree with the entire approach of the Neighborhood Slow Streets program, that any person or neighborhood should have to apply for safety treatments. And I'm just looking over the website now and the process where it continues to say that applicants should build support among the residents. Applicants solicit letters of support from key stakeholders, including neighborhood associations, police precincts, schools, neighborhood liaisons, and elected officials. And then the city reviews and evaluates the zones based on objective criteria. And you mentioned some of that criteria and, you know, the presentation on the other part of the website highlighting how many of the applications correlate with how many youth live there, how many seniors, traffic crashes, et cetera. But if it is all based on data, we should be able to identify where the neediest areas are and be able to move equally or, you know, had more equity in getting to different districts around the city without having to force residents to go through a process, pull their political connections, you know, take time off work to go talk to the police captain and all of that. If it is truly objective, we need to either find the funding to fund more and all of it, or just do it proactively on the city's part rather than forcing people to jump through these hoops that are just for, I'm not even sure what, to try to create some sense of engagement when it just leaves people feeling frustrated. After every crash, we hear from that neighborhood, I tried to submit this application, it got rejected, and we were delayed this year and were not accepted. So I continue to send in my letters saying I'm not participating. I do not send in letters of support for any neighborhood association or any group that is trying to apply. And I hope that is taken as a sense that I support all the applications, because I just don't think this way of rationing it based on who's able to assemble the most attractive package is fair or in the best interest of safety across the city. So that is my thoughts on that program. I did have one question that someone had asked me to note specifically on signs and why there are some 20-mile-per-hour speed limit signs around playgrounds that have the 20 and then a playground tag underneath, but not all of those do. So are those triggered by, again, community asking in particular, or?
It's a combination of both, like I've been saying. So we do want to put 20 miles, just like we do for school zones. We want to expand that program. So, yes.
And so that's not a resources issue. It's just more about identifying and getting out there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let me see if I have any other questions. When we did the last go-round of changing the default speed limit to 25 miles an hour, there was a set of legal memos that the administration had given to the council explaining why, how there was actually city authority to do more in terms of bringing down the speed limit separate from the state or not needing to go to the state. What was the latest resolution of where city authority stands in relation to the Municipal Modernization Act and our ability to bring down the limit further?
I can talk about just the basics. I don't have the detail, but the commissioner of the Boston Transportation Department has the authority to declare safety zones, and
without state approval.
The commissioner can do that independently, and that's how we do our school zones, or have been doing our school zones for years, and other zones as well.
Okay, and how large of is there any limitation on how big a zone could be? Could it be, this entire corridor spanning a
I don't
large
have the
area?
specifics, but
Okay.
I probably, that level of detail is not in the legislation or the ordinance that has it, so.
But theoretically, district councilors, for example, could submit a list of requests of where they wanted to get the special designation, and the department could review those.
Yeah, but we would have to establish some criteria by which we designate specific streets or specific kind of, an area around a school or a playground. I don't think we can willy-nilly kind of do that on a, just roll it out. I think it has to be done with some thought and some analysis, because conditions differ a lot in every neighborhood.
Yeah, but most of the time when the community's asking for it, there's some other trigger anyway. So, I mean, if the sponsors were interested, that could be one follow-up with a working session to talk about that type of criteria for how we could do more proactively.
Absolutely.
Does that apply only for default and not for posted? Or if something were designated, it would
Then
be
it would be
posted too?
posted. It would be posted, and that
okay.
would be the speed limit.
Okay, great.
Just,
let's
just one
move-
point on your
Yes.
earlier issue.
Yes, please.
As I've said earlier on in this hearing, we do proactively, outside of the Neighborhood Slow Streets program, identify locations that need interventions for public safety. We have our critical crash corridors.
Yeah,
network.
I understand. I know.
So it's
I
not
know
that we're
how
limiting
hard you're
our,
working.
plus the application process is extremely simple. You can literally give in one page of
But why ask
information.
for letters of support at all? Why?
It's not, it's something, I think part of it, and again, we can do improvements in areas that don't have a letter of support.
Yeah.
But it's really, and I'm speaking more personally
Sure.
here, but I think that it's important that communities embrace the idea and that communities have some ownership of the improvements that we collectively would make in that neighborhood, and I think that it's far more effective when we do that, because we get people who actually live on a street, participate, and tell us, this is what I see every day, or this is what we as a community think is important. And I think that's the kind of, for lack of a better word, philosophy behind getting communities to show support.
I fully agree with the need for civic engagement to drive the process and talking about making choices between different design options. I guess I would just respectfully suggest that a different way of doing that could be for there to be a proactive walk audit coordinated through ONS maybe,
Yeah,
and
that's a
go
good
with the local neighborhood association, walk through the area, to hear from people what their concerns are, and have that feedback into all the other data that you're making decisions based on. But it just really feels like it becomes almost a political, or the perception can be that you need to have a certain amount of in, or that it is, either the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And all I hear from communities are frustration about that.
Okay.
Councillor Edwards, welcome. Do you have any questions for Faneet?
No, I just wanted to, we've been listening in on the hearing and in our office, and I just want to appreciate that you're here, and just I'm excited to hear about the conversation and the ways in which we are going to implement or look at different ways in which we move around the city, and speed limit being one of them. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. We'll go to public testimony for now, and if Councillor OMalley pops back in, we can make sure he gets his questions as well. So, Vineet, if you have time to
Absolutely.
stay, okay, just in
Absolutely.
case Councillor OMalley comes back. So we'll move to public testimony. I'll ask if one could grab the other sheet for me. In the meantime, Christine Valencourt and Eliza Parad, feel free to come to the microphones.
Hello, I'm Christine Valencourt. Sorry for my voice, I'm getting over a cold. I live at the Artist Building at 300 Summer Street, and we're the only residential building on that historic part of Summer Street. I've witnessed a motorcycle accident. I've witnessed a friend of mine almost get killed by a car at the crosswalks before. One car would stop, but the other car lane wouldn't, and my friend almost got killed. I'm so thankful for the Crossroads Initiative. The lanes are narrower, there's landscaping going in, there's bike trails. We're hoping that that will slow people down. It's hard to know right now because there's construction there, and that always slows people down. The fact that there's more crosswalks with pedestrian-activated crosswalks with the signs that blink, sometimes people still don't stop, though I've even used the blinking ones now, and I have to still wait for someone to stop. I noticed that the new 25-mile-an-hour speed limit signs have gone up, and we're grateful for that because I think they were 30 before. I'm in agreement with everyone that, or Councillor Flynn, thank you, for the speed limit being 20 miles an hour in many parts of the city. There's places that people use as runways, and you're right, it's from frustration. There's too many cars on the street. The transportation needs to be better. I try not to take my car. I like that there's no parking left for residents or people in, I would probably get killed for this, in the South Boston area. Not that a lot of people need them for families or the disabled, but the less cars, the better. If the transportation's better, people will take that instead of driving around Boston. We need that drastically. Less cars on the street, less pollution, less global climate change. On Congress Street, I know of a woman, a friend of mine, an elderly woman who had her leg broken by a car. I know of a girl that I didn't hear what happened to her, but she has brain injury, and I'm sure not a good life if she is still alive. Not that pedestrians aren't at fault. I love the idea of educating pedestrians and educating folks driving. Many years ago, in the 70s, I was in Seattle, and I was in a neighborhood, and I was crosswalking because there was absolutely no traffic around. And I was crosswalking in my 20s. A police car pulled up and said that they would fine me for doing that again, and I explained I was from Boston, and they let me go. But that was in the 70s that they were ticketing pedestrians. I've sat through numerous lights at South Station waiting for pedestrians to stop crossing. They block the lights and nothing is done. I think pedestrians should also be ticketed and also be educated. It increases the frustration of people trying to go where they need to go. I agree that the data should show where the safe roads should be, should identify those streets. I agree with video enforcement. And I also wanted to say that I was lucky enough to go to London and got back about 2 weeks ago, and I did notice that they also had bike lanes with traffic lights, and all the bike people were actually following them. It was like one of the most astonishing things, and it was very sane. There was hardly any, I don't even remember cars honking in London because the roads were so well organized. The pedestrians behaved at the lights, and bikes were following the rules, or they could get ticketed. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Christine.
Okay.
Eliza, and following Eliza will be Ford Cavallari.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Councillor Flynn, Councillor Baker, for holding this important hearing, and Chairperson Wu, and thank you to all the councillors who are here today. My name is Eliza Parad. I work at the Boston Cyclists Union. I live in Jamaica Plain. I ride a bike. I take the bus. I drive a car. I use all modes of our transportation, and I'm a lifelong Boston resident. I'm here on behalf of our 1,300 dues-paying members and tens of thousands of more people who cycle and care about safe cycling infrastructure. I just want to tell you quickly who we are. We've been going around the city talking to people about why they bike, and I just want to share a little bit. We ride because it keeps our diabetes and our depression under control. We ride because it keeps us healthy. We ride because it is often the fastest and cheapest way to get where we need to go. We ride when and where public transportation cannot take us where we need to go. We ride to make a living, especially folks in East Boston and our neighborhoods of color as bike messengers and delivery cyclists. We ride because it brings us joy, and even according to one Dorchester resident in your district, Councillor Baker, because it makes me feel free, is what someone said to me recently. So when someone is killed riding their bike, like Meng Jin was killed at the Boston-Cambridge line on Friday near the Museum of Science, we are scared because all these wonderful things that it brings to our lives, we feel that they're threatened. And we know, and I know Vineet knows, and everyone at BTD knows, that like Vision Zero says, traffic deaths are preventable, and we know how to prevent them. So some of the things that I just wanted to mention that have been said here today are, thank you, Councillor Wu, for your comments about the Neighborhood Slow Streets program. We agree it needs to be done based on data and equity, and we actually have a problem with our data right now, and right now we're only getting our data from EMS, so when someone calls an ambulance, and even that shows 4,500 injuries a year across all modes of transportation. And we did have data from BPD, but we no longer have that. And we need the position that analyzed that data to come back and to be funded and to share that so it crosses over. There's also new technologies that at high crash intersections can look at crashes so that we capture the ones like someone mentioned that go unreported where the police and EMS are not called. We actually, in grieving the cyclist death over by the Museum of Science, also found out that a second cyclist died on Friday that is not in either of those systems. So to this point, she was hit in a hit and run and died 2 days later in the Fenway. And so we're still trying to find out what happened, but we know that those sort of deaths are occurring, that serious injuries are occurring, and we don't even know about them, and they're not even captured. And so we need to get the data right, and then we need to improve our streets based on that data in an equitable way that gets to your district, Councillor Baker, that gets to all the districts across the city. I just wanted to actually quote the mayor from the Vision Zero Action Plan. He said that driving, walking, and riding a bike on Boston Street should not be a test of courage. We know how to build safer streets. We know how to protect our most vulnerable road users who are suffering disproportionately because of speeding traffic and distracted drivers. And it's true. And Vineet mentioned many of the things that the tools that the city has and other councilors as well, daylighting, speed humps, road diets, narrowing our streets. And we, while we support the 20-mile-per-hour speed limit, we want to suggest that it always come paired with the infrastructure improvements. And I live right by the Casey by Casey and by the Arborway, and I drive my car on the Arborway all the time. It's 25 miles per hour. If I go 25 miles per hour, I feel unsafe because everyone around me is going 40. So that, you know, we have many arterial roads like that where even though the speed limit is lowered, it's not, until the infrastructure meets it, people are not going to slow down. So we need to figure out how to get more money into the arterials, the major roads, which are the ones that are already showing, according to the data, as having the highest crash rates. And actually, on that point, the Vision Zero Action Plan that from the city a few years ago does cite that fatalities are 8 or 9 times more likely on arterial roads for all road users. So again, we really want to see some focus on that. And finally, just to echo what Councillor Janie said, that there are, and this woman before me, is that there are too many cars, and people will make other choices when they're presented with safe options, when they have safe connected routes to bike from their home to their job, when they have reliable public transportation. We need to invest in our buses, we need to invest in our public transit so that people have those options as well. And although I'm representing the cyclist community, we work really closely with the rest of the advocates, Walk Boston, Livable Streets, and on behalf of the Vision Zero Coalition, I did want to end by inviting you all to hear from all the people who have been affected by crashes. This Sunday is World Day of Remembrance, so many people who couldn't come and share their stories here today will be there on Sunday, and it would be so great to see councilors here listening to residents from across the city talking about this issue. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Eliza. We'll go to Ford and then to Councillor OMalley for questions, and then anyone else who wishes to testify after that. That's all right. Welcome, Ford.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wu, and other councillors. Good to see you. Thank you very much for having this hearing. I think it's really important to have the discussion about safety on our streets and the streets in general. I do want to note, and I think it is very notable, that most of the discussion has been about issues other than the 20-mile-per-hour speed limit. We've talked about distracted drivers, we've talked about capacity, we've talked about alternatives, bicycling. And I think that that's important for us to think about, because in many ways, I think the signature issue of reducing the speed limit to 20 miles per hour is more of a feel-good measure than an actual useful policy. It's a good lightning rod to have the discussion about the other issues. Maybe I'm cynical, but I do remember the 2016 discussions, which led to the speed limit coming down to 25. They were very similar to today's discussions. Now we're here taking the speed limit, ratcheting down another 5 miles an hour. I hesitate to think about the 2020 discussion we could have talking about lowering the speed limit to 15 miles an hour, because nothing much has changed. And I want us to, while I don't oppose taking the speed limit down in many neighborhoods that need a lower speed limit, I think it's really important that we take very seriously the other issues that have come up. I think distracted driving is a really big issue that we don't talk enough about. Talking on the phone, texting, GPS. People are doing this. Cell phones and driving just don't mix, and we need to do something about that. I think poor adherence to traffic laws. People routinely run red lights, as we've talked about. People run stop signs. I have a friend in the North End that was struck by a car that ran through a stop sign, broke a leg. Fortunately, is back and active again. But, I think all of us can think about all the people we know who have been hit by vehicles. And oftentimes it's not the speed limit. In the North End, you'd be hard-pressed to find a place where you can get a car up to 20 miles an hour. It's other issues that we have to take just as seriously. Also, driving out of lanes. People are just drifting from one lane to another, causing problems. Stopping in the middle of the street because they don't understand what Waze is telling them. Double parking to check their navigation system. These are all things that need to be examined and corrected, at least with equal intensity to our every 2-year discussion about speed limits. I also want to emphasize the street capacity issue. Boston is growing. There were many decades that Boston wasn't growing, but it is growing right now. It's growing rapidly. We have more population. We have more office space. You can just see it in the skyline. And yet, we have more cars than streets, and we really have to address the issue of how we can control this. I think it's useful, and I remember talking to Councillor Baker about Uber and Lyft and the issue of did the promise of ride sharing actually bring down the number of cars on the street, or has it gone up? I think we all know, and as Nancy referenced, it has gone up a lot, and we need to think about that, and we need to think about how we can control perhaps the number of cars in creative ways. The other thing that's been mentioned is public transportation, and I think we in Boston should all take very seriously the lack of subway expansion that we uniquely as a city are looking at when you compare us to New York or Philadelphia or other cities. They're actually building mass transit systems. Certainly San Francisco and Washington, D.C. are way ahead of us. We have not had an increase in the capacity of the central subway system in the central Boston area since 1924. We did receive something called the Silver Line, which is clearly a failed toy bus system that doesn't work. Councillor Janie mentioned her trip to Seattle. Seattle replaced its bus tunnel with a rail system because the bus tunnel didn't work. Our bus tunnel, which is the only public transit in the Seaport District, which is the new downtown of Boston, huge amounts of offices. People don't take the public transit system seriously there, and I think we need to address that and change it. And all these issues are interrelated. So I'm hoping we can have a serious issue. We can take time to understand these other serious issues. We can at least with equal vigor to the speed limit issue, we can try to understand how the interrelatedness between lack of public transportation, the street safety issues, and how many cars should be on our roads, and how do we get there. Again, I think it's great that we're having the discussion, but I just want to make sure that rather than focusing solely on the sugar high of ratcheting down the speed limit yet again by 5 miles an hour, we really take very seriously coming up with real solutions that encompass all of these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ford. Councillor OMalley?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I will be brief. I apologize, I had to step out for a conflict, and we'll go over the recording. But just had a couple questions, Vineet, and wanted to thank everyone's testimony that I heard before I had to step out and now. I think it has been said clearly how, while the possibility of lowering the speed limit to 20 miles per hour is one tool, there are so many other things that we need to be focused on, and I know that, Vineet, you share that desire, so hopefully that can come of this as well. First things first, you had mentioned that the commissioner has the right to set the 20-mile-per-hour zone in school zones, which would not require a home rule petition? And I guess, is the definition of school somewhat amorphous, that it could be a daycare or it could be?
But I definitely worth investigating.
Okay, yeah, I'm just curious to see what we can do now without the home rule petition, although if there is a home rule petition, that could be. And then secondly, I think in the first round of public testimony, someone had mentioned, I neglected to write down his name, about the need of red light cameras, speed light cameras, which is something that I know other cities and other countries have done to great success. It is my understanding that there is some First Amendment prohibition that would prevent a speed camera. Is that correct?
One, as was pointed out earlier, we need state legislation.
Okay.
So it has to come from the state legislature to allow cities and towns throughout the Commonwealth to do red light speed enforcement.
So this would be a federal law, obviously. This would be, if other cities do it, this could be done at the state level.
Yeah.
Do you know if there's any pending legislation at the state level that would allow this?
I don't know the specifics. I would think that there is something up at the State House every year.
Yeah.
But
a lot of these bills that are introduced biannually and nothing might happen. Well, I mean, I for one think that it is a incredibly important conversation to have, and certainly I would think that we ought to be looking at a piloted program of that in the city of Boston. I mean, I think the one sort of common denominator here, and which my colleagues and I can share every time we have conversations about this, is enforcement, recognizing the fact that the Boston Police Department may not have the power to do the type of enforcement that we need. So I would certainly think that that should be something, I hope, to the, Madam Chair, through you to the makers, that we have a conversation about in terms of next steps, because I think that could be a way to both have a profoundly positive impact at relatively little or no cost to the taxpayer, other than, of course, but the installation of the cameras, but they would presumably more than pay for themselves. So again, I want to be brief because other people have to testify, but wanted to thank the makers again and think that we have an opportunity here to look at a number of strategies, some of which may require a home rule petition, others of which could just be sort of a directive of the mayor or of the commissioner. So I'm hopeful that we will continue to do that. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor OMalley. Any response, Vineet?
No, I think it's thank you again on behalf of the administration. The mayor and the commissioner and Chief Osgood are really focused on this issue. And it's literally the #1 priority for our department. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I know a few other folks who are interested in testifying, so please make your way. Oh, no. If anyone else wishes to testify, feel free to just come down and line up at the microphones.
Good morning. I apologize for not signing in. My name's John Provenzano. I live in South Boston, and I basically came here to support the gentlemen that are up there that I know well. And I guess it's like a poker player. If you talk about poker, your adrenaline gets going. And this is very similar to it because of all the things that I can relate to. And what's happened, my daughter was also hit by a car on the corner of Farragut Road and Broadway. No stop. The fellow blew through the stop sign, and that was 20 years ago. So I'll selfishly talk about my town. The statistics that we got from Katie was that 30,000 more people have come into our town since 2010. So the first thing I would say is I think we have to start thinking like we're like New York City now. We are so congested that we have to start changing things in a way that they've changed things. For instance, one thing, 20 years ago, I was here with the late Councillor Kelly, and it was about L Street, about putting speed bumps, Frank. And he did his research and came back and said, They tell me that it's a throughway. We can't put speed bumps. We'll change it. Make it a one-way. I think in New York City, and I think this is what we have to do, and selfishly I would say South Boston, is that we have to change a lot of the streets to one-way. We're all blind intersections. So automatically, people coming up the street, it's a blind intersection. 2 weeks ago, you guys, and I should thank you for what's happened since this little boy got killed. And he's in our mind every day. And we have to do things to change that. I don't care what the money cost is. I don't care what the money cost is. We have to find it somewhere, federally, state, whatever. We'll take collections if we have to, but we have to change it. 2 weeks ago, after you guys put the white poles in at the intersections, a few of the intersections, so that there's less parking, which is another problem altogether in our town, on the corner of Marine Road where I live and your dad and your mother live, on the corner of Marine Road and L Street, 2 cars collided off the street into the white poles, and 3 out of the 4 homes on the corner, 3 of them have already been hit. Foundation's been wiped out on 2 of them. And I know these people personally. So it's something, let's think about the 21st century for a minute. And believe me, Eddie, I didn't plan on speaking this, but the adrenaline is even going further. To Councillor Wu, no disrespect, but it's falling on deaf ears. Your complaints are falling on deaf ears. And if you have to get people together to go to this commission or whatever, whoever they are, and protest or whatever, all you have to do is call. We're in the 21st century. In my day, we had what they called governors. You know, you had, I hope I'm not taking too much time, just, they had governors on what you called carburetors on the engines. And I had neighbors that had them, that literally, when you got into the what we call, what the law is thickly settled area, the car automatically slowed down and wouldn't go any more than 20 or 25 miles an hour. And back then, we had engines that were 400 horsepower engines. I mean, these things flew. Why couldn't we come up with, in the 21st century, and I know, you know, if you go to MIT, I guess you could get some people that could come up with something quick with the electronic stuff, you know, computer stuff, that on intersections, that in different areas or whatever, just as a pilot program, where as soon as the car comes off of a highway and it gets into the thickly settled area, that electronic beam slows that car down to, whether they like it or not, it can't go any more than 20 miles an hour or 25 miles, whatever the speed limit that you're going to set it on. Why couldn't that happen? You know, why can't we have monorail instead of buses going from South Boston down to South Station? I sat on the beach with a fella almost 30 years ago. His name is John Drew, and some people probably know him from Boston. He actually came from South Boston originally, God bless him. My children and his children sitting down the Cape, and he was starting to get in development, and he was saying back then, I can envision monorail just from the seaport down to South Station, and the amount of people it would help. I mean, I know it's real expensive and stuff, but we have to start thinking in the 21st century, not the buses and okay. I'm just going to make a couple more comments, okay? So the stop signs. I was fortunate enough to spend a lot of years down in Florida after I retired. In towns like Marco Island, Naples, they have stop signs as soon as you step, and this happened because it's a real good area for tourists. So, you know, through the winter, it just blows out of proportion. And then we're having so many car accidents that they had to do something. They took the stop signs and the crosswalks, and I think it was through, because I went down to Town Hall, I think it's through the what do you call it, the sun, the
Solar powered.
yeah, solar, little solar panels, that as soon as you step on the crosswalk, the stop sign illuminates. The crosswalk illuminates, little tiny red lights. 20 seconds, 25 seconds. So I went down to Town Hall. It's not a councilor, but whatever their official is down there. Excuse me, I'm nervous because I don't speak that much, but this fella told me it came down to 95% difference in having people getting hit by cars that were getting hit left and right because obviously, you know, cars are speeding. You know, if you watch TV and all the advertising automobiles, they're advertising them flying. You know, little caption down the bottom, this is in a training, whatever. Everybody is driving too fast, so you have to control it that way. You have to do something like that with a pilot program for whatever it costs. In one part of one town, I don't care which one it is because we're all neighbors. Doesn't matter whether it's JP, East Boston, South Boston, is definitely got to be on the list, the top of the list. So that's what I would suggest as far as stop signs and crosswalks for a pilot program. The congestion, one-way streets, I believe you have to start doing. We did it a few years ago because of the snowstorms in South Boston. Yes, you had some complaints, but because they were all blind intersections and every town is like that, we have to start thinking like New York. And you just do the statistics. You'll find out the statistics. And one way, it's everywhere. That helps it. Electronics. I kept on writing things down because it's just crazy how much. Oh, the diversion, Ed, to your comment about Day Boulevard, and we've gone to a couple of community meetings, but is there a possibility that in the morning, say from 6 to 9, 6 to 10, that the expressway, that a lot of the traffic that's coming in to town, we can block off the exits that are getting off at Columbia Circle. And if anybody is familiar with Columbia Circle, from 1:30 to say 6, you can't get through there because there's so much traffic. Could we stop the traffic from getting off into South Boston? Because most of that traffic is going downtown to work, which is fine. But if they couldn't get off at those at those two exits, and they have to get off downtown, would that be a good, would that be a suggestion that you could consider? And that would probably be through the state, I guess.
Yeah, we'll have to.
The expressway?
Yeah, we would need to work with state agencies and with the neighborhood.
Yeah.
To see how we can change certain street directions or put restrictions.
Just for a certain amount of time, and I think it would help as far as Day Boulevard and L Street, which is where a lot of that traffic goes. That might help.
Yeah.
That might help.
We just have to be careful that we're not pushing traffic to another residential road.
Into downtown,
Yeah,
which
so,
is
yeah.
where, and maybe if they start going down there and it's that congested, that they might start thinking of an alternative way of getting into town.
All good ideas. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Just to mention that 20 years ago, with Jimmy Kelly, God bless him, he did what he could. He went to the state and all and said, L Street is it's just simple wording to change it, that you have to do something to change that. Frank, the speed bumps, this isn't critical because I love them. I worked at the bathhouse for 3.5 years until a couple of months ago. And I've gone to my congressman many a time talking about what was going to happen. On Day Boulevard, if they've done some great work as far as that's a good start, but it took a death to have that happen. We need a barrier. Thousands and thousands of people walk Day Boulevard every day in the summer for the beaches. thousands. You can't, but a lot of us walk it right through the whole year. And I just got through talking to Congressman Lynch about the situation on Day Boulevard. And about a week after we talked the first time, fella came down Day Boulevard, went out of control, went across both lanes, up onto the sidewalk, and we just put out some old rusty lockers from the bathhouse to be thrown out. And we put them in front of the doors where a lot of people, so they all had to come out the main entrance, right through it. And so my concern is that, and my great-grandson and my great-granddaughter and my granddaughters walk that beach every day, even right through the fall, the winter, and whatever. And we need a barrier similar to Summer Street. If you go down Summer Street, the bridge right before you get to Flynn Terminal, it's a nice-looking barrier too, but it's only about 2 feet. But that's going to prevent the next fatality on Day Boulevard. I guarantee it. And you've got to take it into consideration that barrier go along Day Boulevard down towards Castle Island.
Thank you, Mr. Provenzano.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry I took so much time, but
Appreciate you being here.
Yeah.
So thank you all for
Mike.
being here. I do want to recognize Councillor Flaherty as well. Would you like to offer any remarks? Or?
Obviously, to support my colleagues' efforts. Heard from my neighbor, who's got front row seat down there to see what's going on Day Boulevard, so I echo those comments. At the end of the day, whether we could have speeding limit at 10 miles an hour, if we're not going to get the enforcement support from our transportation and our public safety officials, then it'll be all for naught. So I think this is an important piece of it, making sure that we're supporting and bolstering our traffic divisions in each one of our police districts, and at the same token, put more funding into that Safe Streets program that so many neighborhoods very much desire to participate and be involved with, but so many don't get that opportunity for either a lack of funding or they get denied and then they have to continue to reapply. So I think we know where the hotspots are in the city. We hear them. I know Councilor Wu and I hear them as at-large councilors, but all of my district colleagues here know where those spots are in their respective districts, and we need to do a better job of giving community residents the support that they need, whether it's through these speed humps, the signs, your speed is, enforcement. All those things are a part of lowering the speed limit. So I appreciate your time and attention to detail, and for the lead sponsors. Thank you,
Councillor Flaherty. Councillors OMalley and McCarthy, any final words? And then I'll leave it to the lead sponsors. Councillor Baker.
Thank you for coming out. Thank you for running a good hearing, and also thank Councillor Flynn for his leadership here. Hopefully we can start doing what we want to do, building these streets out and really seeing some results. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. And finally, Councillor Flynn.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your testimony and your work for so many years. We appreciate your leadership for that. And just wanted to say thank you to Councillor Baker. Thank you to Councillor Wu for your strong leadership on this issue for many years. And maybe my final comments might be that could we possibly, here's a statement, not really a question, but could we consider establishing a city task force or a working group made up of the Elderly Commission, the school department, BHA? We see a lot of these elderly developments right in the neighborhoods, whether it's Foley or Powers or Castle Square. They're on main streets in South Boston, Dorchester, in the Bay Village in Chinatown. There's one across from the Park Plaza Hotel throughout Chinatown and the South End as well. Could we establish a working group of city departments? Everyone comes together, meets periodically, and goes over public safety issues, pedestrian safety issues, how we can make our streets safer for everyone. That's one point. And then my final point is we see so much development taking place in the city and in these neighborhoods specifically. Could some of that type of funding, whether it's 1% of a project or a certain percentage of a project, be used going back into the neighborhood, such as the linkage program, but going back into the neighborhood on pedestrian safety issues, making sure that the areas around those developments are safe for everybody, you know, especially for our elderly, for young kids walking to school, for people going to work, for every resident in that neighborhood. Just something we can have a conversation about. Again, thank you for being here, and this is our first step, and we will continue to talk with you. And again, thank you for being here and your leadership on this issue as well.
Thank you. And this will conclude our hearing on docket number 1327, order for a hearing regarding Boston speed limits and pedestrian safety. This hearing is adjourned.